Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of FLOYD STREET'S FINEST. I am your host, your friend, Jeff Greer, and we are immediately joined here by my pal, Mark Lieberman. You may remember him from Rick Pitino's staffs. Mark, it's crazy to say this, back in the day now. It probably doesn't feel like it's been that long, but 10 years ago for the Louisville Cardinals.
It's starting to feel a little bit when I wake up in the morning and it's tough to get out of bed. So that part is definitely resonating.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about here with Mark, but before we do that, I just want to recommend that folks check out all of the different array of things that the Field of 68 has to offer. So many things to subscribe to. So just search Field of 68 on all of your social media outlets and platforms. Make sure you subscribe, go on YouTube. You can watch all sorts of video content there. And of course, for us, we always ask you to please review and rate this podcast as well, particularly on Apple. I think that's where you can do it the most. Leave us a 5-star rating. If you don't want to leave us a 5-star rating, as I always say, just don't leave a rating. Just don't even tell anybody. But that's how people find podcasts on Apple Podcasts. So please participate in the algorithmic influencing, as we'll call it. All right, Mark. Well, let's get right to it.
Sure.
First and foremost, you are back in town, and
I am.
Have been making some appearances on ESPN Louisville. I know you're coaching as well. You've been doing some clinics. Let's update people first and foremost on what you've been up to.
Well, it's great to be back here. And look, Jeff, our relationship goes back a long way. And you wrote a fabulous article about my situation. For those who don't know, my son, I was an assistant coach for Rick Pitino at FIU, and my son passed away from SIDS. So since that time, it's been a long, arduous journey, and I've been able to get back into coaching in different capacities. And my 8-year-old daughter lives in Louisville. So the last 3 years I was at Southeastern Louisiana as the associate head coach. Loved my time there. Loved the kids. We won 19 games last year, 1 game away from the NCAA tournament. And it was one of those moments, I wouldn't call it an epiphany. I just didn't want to miss any more time with her. Mm-hmm. And, tonight I get to go to her soccer game, her indoor soccer game. I get to go to her dance classes. I get to see her after school. I get to spend time with her. So that's the most important thing to me. And just the fact that I get to coach again here, try and do what you're doing. You do a fantastic job, and just
thanks. I appreciate
just go on the air, analyze games and whatnot. It's been a good experience for me to be back, and I enjoy the city, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and and I can vouch for Mark. I mean, obviously, coaching at the level that you've coached at, there are a few people who are more fun to talk to about the game of basketball. And I was telling my wife a couple of days ago, actually probably a couple of weeks ago now, I'd just been on when you were one of the guest hosts on the radio on ESPN Louisville. I was like, yeah, the last story I wrote about him was just really digging into the 2011 NCAA tournament loss, and
right.
You could hear the pain in everyone's voice as you all were talking about it. She's like, why did you do that? That's just evil that you would do that to these guys. But
you're a sadistic man, Jeff.
I know. Well, it was, I think I was assigned the story of like the most painful NCAA tournament loss. I'm pretty sure that, if my memory serves, but no, always enjoy chatting with Mark about basketball and certainly digging through some fun basketball memories, and not so fun, but just but fond basketball memories. Well, Mark, let's talk a little bit about this current team. You've had a chance to watch many of the games this season. You've been to practices. Obviously, like I said, being on the radio and getting a chance to talk more about it with others who have watched the games. 2-10 Louisville basketball. Just your general impressions right now of where they are and where you think they may be headed.
Every play has a story. And if you look at every situation, we were hoping that maybe Ellis turned the corner with the game against Western Kentucky, where he's understanding how to create for others. He's driving gaps. He's getting fouled. and he's drawing fouls. He drew 7 fouls in that game, which is a really good number. And that's something statistically that coaches look for about how you're getting into the lane and so on and so forth. Just right now, it's I wish we could all put a finger on it, but just figuring out one thing that's just real noticeable, and I like to call it special teams, is just their out of bounds plays. They're underneath out of bounds, they're side out of bounds. They've had in the last 3 games 2 turnovers, 1 5 count, and those type of things at high major basketball. Those are just giving points away, and that's just a little thing. And obviously, it's all made up of just a bunch of little things. Defensively, finding out what they want to do, if they want to press, if they want to play zone, if they want to play man. Every team needs to have an identity, and at this point in December, that team hasn't found it yet. I know Coach Payne, and I've been to the practices. I've had conversations with him, copious amounts of talks just about just the little things. And it's an arduous process for him right now, because you don't know who you are. And if you don't have that, and if you don't instill that every day, then these are the type of things that can happen.
I want to dig into a couple of those points. One is, I think the execution, and you mentioned the blobs and slobs and these things that are really important. And I've heard so many coaches talk about, you've got, maybe 6 to 8 of them a game, right? Like very few, and probably even fewer than that in a fair amount of games, where you've got a chance to draw something up and get a layup, or draw something up and get a corner 3. When those don't go well, I realize it's a case-by-case thing, but for me, as a layperson who has not been a coach, who has not been a player at this level, I keep coming back to, is that coaching, or is that players, or is that somewhere in between? And I'm not trying to pin it on one group of people or another, but when you're looking at it as a coach, where do you fall in that discussion?
You're right from the standpoint of just the layperson that's watching the game and understanding there's so many things that are connected, and there's so many little things. If a guy misses a screen, that's not going to open up somebody on out of bounds. Going directly back on an out of bounds play instead of an angle. These are just little fine points that you have to, as you're watching the game, to understand. These are things that can break a team down. And right now, that's what you're seeing. You're just seeing guys that obviously there's a disconnect, but you're just not seeing that. You've got to eliminate losing plays. And a losing play might be not sprinting into a pin down screen. A losing play might be not having your hands down instead of what we call tracing the face and bothering the ball, and not allowing a split of a gap. Throughout the game, we would chart, when I was coaching at Louisville, when I was at FIU, even when I was at Monsignor Pace before this, you take an analytical approach to every little thing. Obviously, plus and minuses are charted during the game, but there's so many other factors. And to be successful, you have to eliminate the losing plays. And the obvious ones for fans are the turnovers or a missed shot or so on. But there's so many things that go into having a team that can find a way to put a string of winning plays together so you can be successful. And it really is. It's done in practice. It's done in film. And you got to have everybody to buy in. You mentioned coaches, players. It's everybody. Everybody's laser focused. I heard Jalen Withers comment about, hey, we may have taken Lipscomb too lightly. That's not an approach for a 2-9 team to take. You've got to be, hey, every play is like your last. When I'm coaching, every situation, I always like to say, play the game, not the drill. Every situation for me is you're down 1 if you're on the offensive end in a practice situation, you're down 1 with 20 seconds to go. If you're on the defensive end, you're up 1 with 20 seconds to go. So guys can simulate that type of situation. And, I'm not sure specifically that's happening in their practices, but my point is, whatever it takes for every coach on that staff to understand, we've got to eliminate every situation that affects winning by eliminating the losing plays.
Well, yeah, and I was just as shocked as probably everyone else about that line. I mean, like you said, you're 2-9. You've been blown out in five or six of those 9 losses, or 6 of those losses, and you just lost to one of the teams in their
Yeah.
league, in Bellarmine by a point. You were getting your butt kicked until you came back late in that game, and I just that stuff. I don't get it. I don't understand how that's possible. I don't understand the environment, and where that's possibly coming from. Something that stuck out to me from the post-game interview that Bob Valvano and Paul Rogers had with Kenny Payne was, Bob was talking about how frustrating it was that there was no ball pressure. There was no on-ball pressure, um, against Lipscomb. And just to pull that further back out, the response from Kenny Payne was, well, we talked about it for 3 days. We talked about it every day leading up to this game, how much pressure we have to put on the ball. So when the coach says that, the player says we didn't take them seriously, and then the result is not a ton of ball pressure. I always, because this happened with Chris Mack too, a lot, where it would be like, well, we talked about this, and then the players would say, we didn't do this. And so how do you evaluate that when you're a coach? Like, how do you sit down and say, okay, if this is happening when I think this should be happening, what's the evaluation process to try to figure out how to meet that in the middle and start nipping some of that stuff out?
It's a tough job when your livelihood and your mindset's based on 18 to 24-year-olds. It's a really tough gig when that's your mindset. But that's the job. That's the job. Jeff, if you've got to transfer what you know to them in any way, shape, or form. People are clamoring for him to be yelling, Coach Payne to be yelling on the sidelines, getting in people's faces. Whatever it takes, whatever your personality is, it could be done in practice. Whatever your message is, it's got to resonate with the players. It's got to get through, or those players don't play. Mm-hmm. And there's no better motivator than the bench. And whatever it takes to get those guys to understand, to see the game through a coach's eyes, that's paramount. That's what it takes to be successful in the world of coaching. You can know everything there is to know about the game of basketball, but if you can't transfer that to your players, it's all out the door. It doesn't matter. So we can all talk till we're blue in the face, but it's got to be absolutely done time after time after time after time. And it takes a lot. And whether it's, hey, you're going to send player X to the film room for 20 minutes with this coach every day, and he's going to watch 90 clips of great NBA ball pressure and understand where his feet should be, where his hands should be, and so on and so forth. Whatever it takes to get that done, it has to be done. And if not, it reverts back to what we talked about. Those are losing plays, not having ball pressure, because ball pressure not only bothers the ball handler, but we always like to say the best post defender is ball pressure, because then they can't see into the post. So there's so many little things that are just tied to it. But if you can't get the players to understand that, then there's an issue.
Yeah, I'll never forget switching from playground and high school basketball to my first 2 summers on AAU teams. And obviously we were not going to the Peach Jams and the Under Armour tournaments of the world, but we were playing at a high level for AAU basketball for what I was used to. And I could not handle the ball pressure. And I was really frustrated, like you said, that we couldn't throw the ball in the post a lot from that spot because our center was our best player. And I think when you seed that, when you say, okay, you can get past this first line of defense and get it into the post, well, then all of a sudden you're asking your other 3 defenders defensively to have to do a lot more, who are helping off the ball. You're asking possibly for that on-ball guy to maybe come down a little bit and dig a little bit, and then you're leaving possibly a shooter. I mean, there's just so many things that are affected by each of those movements and things, that ground that you're willing to give up, if the effort isn't there, that it just makes everything that much harder. it keeps happening. I mean, it just keeps happening. I think a lot of people had hoped that especially the Western Kentucky game would be, a sign of effort to come, a sign of things changing in a lot of ways, and understanding the connectivity of all of those little movements that add up. But then a regression was made in the FAMU win. They won, which is great. You got to win when you're playing poorly. But a regression again to Lipscomb. So my question then is more, again, I from a coach's standpoint, I really love hearing from coaches how their brains think, and obviously, a lot of guys in the profession too. So you can have that perspective as well. It's like your team wins 94-83 against Western Kentucky. They shoot the lights out, 50+%. They hit a bunch of threes. Everything went right for Louisville in that game. And they played good defense. 83 points may not suggest that, but they played good defense for a long stretch of that game and were blowing Western Kentucky out.
Right.
How do you get guys who are playing hard when their shots are falling to play hard when their shots are not falling? Because with the exception of that game, Louisville's shots have not been falling.
That's human nature, and every player is offensive sensitive. So if they're shot, you've seen guys make shots. What happens? They're all excited. They're clapping. They're sprinting back. They're slapping the floor, defensively, because they're all engaged. Mm-hmm. To make players understand to have a defensive DNA, and that starts from day one. And the first thing we talked about is having an identity as a team. And right now, this team needs to have an identity of, okay, no matter what, we might not score for 6 minutes, but the other team isn't going to score either. We have to have a defensive DNA. But it's difficult because you're getting guys at the college level. If you're not instilling that from Jump Street, then that's really hard to do, because a lot of these guys have been coached already by different coaches at the collegiate level. They're coming from travel basketball where they can just score at will, and they weren't being held accountable on the defensive end. As a staff, that's the first thing that hey, we're coming in here. We are we're brainwashing those guys to understand, hey, we want to get kills, which is, a stop, 3 stops in a row, or get a score, a stop, and then just continue that cycle of understanding. And even if you're just telling those guys, hey, we're charting an every 4-minute segment, whatever it takes to get those guys to understand, and it's frustrating. And I'm speaking coaches speak here, Jeff, but it right. Really is, unless you're in that arena, unless you're just adamant and you're just getting on these guys to understand what it takes to be connected and have that defensive DNA flowing through you, and you care about that, then that's the only way to spin this and to course correct and recalibrate your team to understand what it takes to get that done. And it's not an easy task. Ellis is playing a lot of minutes. It's very hard for him then to be just a absolute pest defensively, but he's got to do it. And whether it takes, hey, you sub him out before media timeouts and get him that extra 3 or 4 minutes of rest, those are ways to do it. But this team has to start understanding, if they want to be successful in the ACC, they've got to get stops.
Yeah. Well, I'll pivot from this. So we're not all, so we can have some fun with this, Mark. You mentioned
this wasn't fun.
I'm having a blast. I'm having a blast. Louisville fans are probably just want their team to be good so badly. They care so much. But you mentioned kills. So when I worked at the Athletic, I went back and tried to find the origin of the kill. So
love it.
And as a funny side note, a lot of coaches call it different things. I've heard gaps, I've heard turkeys, kills are probably the most common, but just creative names that coaches come up with for these things. And I kept talked to Buzz Williams, I talked to Tom Crean, I talked to Josh Pastner, I talked to a long list of guys who are familiar with that, Chris Mack. And a lot of them pointed to Mike Bray. So then I went to Mike Bray and I said, Mike, where did you get kills from? And he said, oh, no. I did not come up with this. and he pointed to a coach, and of course now we're talking about, I can't remember his name, in the DC area, who would have these real competitive pickup games and would coach on kills and talk about kills, and that's where it originated. So I'm curious, have you heard any other names for them other than kills? Is that surely is the most common reference to the 3 consecutive stops?
That is the most common. That's what I go with. Some of the things you mentioned, I like to. I don't know if I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but I come up with different terms just for things that we do. I mentioned trace the face. That's a big thing for me. I took that from the NBA. That's just, instead of, everybody says you got terms for that, bother the ball pressure, what have you. But my big thing is arm's distance, and the hand is actually in the offensive player's face and bothering his sight, because you want that player to be more consumed with you than what the play is being run. So as far as kills go, I like turkey. I'm going to start using that with our team. We've got a shoot around later today. I'm going to call them turkeys, and I'm fond of that term. But
I love that. I'm pretty sure it was Buzz Williams. I think that's Buzz's. That's his one. I don't know if he still does it.
We all tweak. We all look. This. You've been around this game long enough. We all steal from each other, plays, ideas, concepts, and so on. And it's a fun part of it. The coaching is a fraternity. We're all connected in that way. And that's the brilliance of being in this business. But just getting the players to understand that's a different thing, because coaches can sit in there for hours and talk about this and these schemes, but getting the transfer on the floor, that's the tough part. And that's where most coaches get frustrated. And I really believe this game is overcoached and undertaught. So a lot of players coming in might know a player, might know this, but they don't understand the whys. And that's probably the issue with our country. I was able to go to China a few years ago to do a Nike clinic, and all those guys wanted to do for 2 hours were just drills. We did the same drill for an hour. It wasn't boring or monotonous for them. They just enjoyed it, because I believe it's almost like the outlier, 10,000 hours. You get good at something and understand it, especially now, just players understanding roles. And that's what builds good teams. Everybody wants to be, a scorer, shoot a 3. People have to understand how to be a left tackle, which is the highest paid position in football. You're not going to touch the ball, but you're a great screener. You're a great rebounder. You understand how to play. You sprint back on every play. You're obsessed with rebounding. Those are the guys that affect winning. So you can find those guys, and you can transfer that from a coach to a player. That's when you find success.
Yeah. And I'm with you on that. I watched the obviously this has nothing to do with the what I'm about to talk about. I watched the Aaron Hernandez documentary series the other night on Netflix. It was a very brief, small aside, obviously, to that crazy story, but talking about how Urban Meyer, before all the controversy around him, still considered one of the greatest coaches in college football history. His Florida teams, he was well known for recruiting guys who he thought were competitors first, and then they could feel like they could coach them up to help them get to where they might recognize their skill potential. But the competitor and the competitive nature coming in was obviously going to be a big factor for them. And it worked. I mean, you look at a guy like Tim Tebow, who is just one of the ultra competitors at the college level. And I realize it's a different sport. But clearly the competitive spirit, I think, carried him a lot to great heights compared to what his skill level was. And I always go back to my alma mater, Mark, the team that I'm sure you always hated playing against, or loved it because it was so competitive. But the Pitt Panthers with Jamie Dixon and Ben Howland were just like, I mean, it was a war. It felt like I was watching a war every time they played. And Louisville was very much in that category, UConn as well. Just an absolute war when those teams would play because of the competitive nature of those players and the coaches, and you foster that, and then you build in the basketball on top of that.
Jeff, the best feeling as a coach, the absolute best. Every coach will tell you this on every level. I don't care if you're high school, college, or pro. You go into a game, you should not worry about your team playing hard and competing. That should be, during a game, you don't have to worry about the guy playing hard, or if you're competing, or they're going to get it done. They are absolutely every 50-50 ball. Every single play is like their last. Every coach feels that way. When you feel that way and you feel, hey, you're comfortable, then all that stuff, all the byproduct of your team, all those things that we talked about, you're going to be fine. But no coach wants to go in the game worrying, are we going to compete? Are we going to take a team lightly? That should never be a mindset. And I talk to my players at the high school level now. I tell them, hey, if I'm recruiting, if I was recruiting you as a college player, that play right there, just for the fact that you just, on a turnover, instead of sprinting, your butt back to the paint, you just watch the ball for half a second or one step, then that's a losing play. Every single play is you have a chance to just, not tonight is your mindset. This is not happening tonight. I'm not allowing a blow by. I'm not allowing a split of a gap. I'm going to, I call boxing out car crashing. So we go back to your, terminology. I love to call.
I love that.
Instead of calling it a box out, I call it a car crash. I want a violent hit, and I want you to move a defender, especially when, you don't have the size. So all those things just tied together. That's the important part. The players have to understand that whether you're watching them or not, they care enough to affect the game in every single way that you're never concerned. I've got to tell these guys to play harder, instead of, all right, here's how we're going to scheme this action or offensively or defensively. Yeah. That's what that dead time of coaches before a game. It's the worst. An hour and a half before a game, everything's going through your mind. But the last thing you ever want to think about is my team going to compete tonight? That should never cross your mind. If it does, you're either looking for a new job or looking for new players.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let's finish with this, because anytime I have a Pitino guy on here, someone who coached with him, someone who played for him, we got to get some. We got to dig in. I don't know how much you remember this, Mark, but I'm curious. When was the first time that it really hit you? Like, this guy is intense and is different than anything you have been.
There's several. I will say the one, before I joined the staff, and look, he was great to me. To hire a high school coach to a full-time assistant coach position, I'll be always thankful for what he did. But I will tell you that, we played Villanova. We're at Villanova. And up to that point, I was considered like the golden boy. I was running practices. Everyone was feeling good. Everybody was, if coach would walk in the room, guys are just, or walk down the hall, guys are scurrying to their office. And I'm like, what's going on here? He's the best. He's the nicest guy in the world. He's been so good to me. We played Villanova. We lost that game, and I got about a 25-minute dress down, just about everything from the scout to keeping stats to this, that, and the other. And obviously, as time went on, I realized that's how coach was after the game. He almost went into a different mindset and realm. Like, he didn't even almost remember what he said sometimes afterward. But I will tell you this, that was just a dressing down. If this podcast allowed some certain language, I would be able to share that with you. But it was a different mindset or a different reality after we won. It was always, coach was the most gracious guy in the world. And after a loss, hey, we just knew we better be in the office at 6 a.m. and we're gonna take our beating. So,
there's so many great stories.
Jeff, that's just one that just got. Yeah, my book will come out in a year or so with just about 400 to 500 stories with Coach Pitino. Obviously not all bad and not all those type of situations, but yeah, working for him, look, there's winning and then there's misery. So definitely with Coach Pitino, if you're losing, it's definitely a miserable couple days, and then winning, we're on top of the world.
Well, there are some great stories just through the years from Anas Mahmoud to Donovan Mitchell to Ray Spalding to Quentin Snyder, just guys who just were terrified to be in the facility the day after a loss. Just don't go anywhere. If you don't need to be there, don't go there. You know,
the Imperial March is playing, you know, as we enter the facility, and if he's coming in, everybody's, hey, we're all good, and then the theme plays, and here comes Darth Vader, and things change a little bit.
Well, let's finish on this, Mark, because I know you're pals with Richard as well. Mm-hmm. His coaching journey has taken him to New Mexico, and I actually talked to him before the previous season for the Blue Ribbon magazine preview, and it was before his first season. He had basically brought in a whole new roster. He didn't really know a whole lot yet about his guys, and just to have him get the chance in New Mexico, and seems to be really doing well down there. Have you kept up with his team? Have you kept up with him, and just your thoughts on where he is in his coaching journey?
Yeah, we still talk all the time. And look, they had another win last night. You know, you can have a letdown after you play your dad and you have a big win, but they beat Prairie View, and Prairie View is a sneaky good team. I've always said this about Richard, and it was a curse and a blessing having that last name. And for him, nobody worked harder. When I worked with him for a year, you know, he recruited Rakeem Buckles, so we spent a lot of time together, and then we became pretty close, and then we worked together, and our friendship just grew and grew and grew. I went with him as the assistant head coach at FIU. I will say this, his basketball mind is as good as it gets. He understands the game. He understands how to deal with players. He does a great job in practice. He does a great job transferring that to his team. And Minnesota, he had some success. He did a great job there. You know, there's just some things that were out of his control, but he left. You know, the city loved him, and he didn't. There wasn't anything where, okay, I'm leaving because in disgrace or whatnot. And now look what he's done in year two in that situation. And when you win at New Mexico, that place is rocking and rolling. And I don't know if you watched the game the other night. That's how it is. They love their basketball in Albuquerque, and he's already established himself, and he's back. And we all have these ups and downs as coaches, but I never doubted him just because of his basketball acumen and how hard he took that job as far as understanding all the little things. Look, he never takes himself too seriously, but he takes what he does seriously. Mm-hmm. And I've always admired that about him as well.
Yeah. Oh, he's just very meticulous and just a really sharp guy. I've always enjoyed chatting with him, and it was funny. This might be TMI, but I had my brother. So my brother had colorectal cancer years ago, and he had surgery and everything. He's doing great now. But obviously, as one of his siblings, you got to go get colonoscopies. Just to make sure that you don't have anything. So that's my TMI. I got him on the phone, I think 6 hours after I had my colonoscopy. I'm not sure I was fully there when we were talking. And then I went back and listened. I was like, oh, okay, you sounded fine. But just the most gracious guy. Really enjoyed chatting with him and catching up a little bit. And he always has good dad advice now that I've got an almost 1-year-old at home. So I appreciated that about Richard, but guy works really, really hard. And that was a great way of putting it, Mark. He takes what he does seriously, but he's very self-deprecating, doesn't take himself too seriously. That's a big part of it. Well, Mark, thank you so much for doing this with me. I won't keep you any longer. Before you go, where can people find you? Where can they watch your team? Where can they listen to you on the radio? All those things.
Well, we've won 2 in a row. We're actually 3-3 now. I think that's a pretty big accomplishment for these kids. We play actually on the Christmas tournament in Callaway County, and then I'm able to do some stuff on ESPN, and Bob Vavano and Drew Diener have been gracious to me to have me come on the air and do that stuff. And we're looking towards a big event this summer with some former Louisville players, and I'll be a little cryptic about that because the announcement is coming in a week or two, but I'll be heavily involved with that, and I'll make sure you're the first to know, Jeff, as far as that goes.
Love it.
But it'll be an exciting thing for the city of Louisville as well.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much. We'll keep an eye out for that. We'll be following you closely through the winter, and we'll be listening
Thanks,
for you
Jeff.
on ESPN Louisville.
Always great talking with you, Jeff.
All right. See you later, buddy.
See you, pal.